So Mick and I first met when Mick was the Chief of Staff for Donald Trump, having previously been a congressman and a member of Congress caucuses, including the Freedom Caucus, which is very fitting for the
we could talk about that.
Adam Smith Institute and our Freedom Fighters program of work that we have as well. And Mick and I first really got to know each other when I was the Northern Ireland Secretary and Mick was the Chief of Staff. And I was invited to the White House to have a conversation about Northern Ireland. And because we had met each other previously, one of the things I always enjoyed was the fact that it unnerved our acting ambassador at the time, that they hadn't realised that we actually knew each other and were able to have a conversation. And then Mick was, Donald Trump made Mick the special envoy for Northern Ireland. So we had a lot of conversation.
I considered a promotion from Chief of Staff, by the way.
Yeah. Although we never got you to Royal Portrush to play golf.
Oh, we didn't. 3 days and COVID shut me down, so.
So,
what they said? They told me I could stay if I wanted to. But it was the beginning of COVID when I'm the Northern Irish Special Envoy and I'm in Belfast and they're shutting things down for COVID. And they said, well, we have rules now that you can only have 4 people in a meeting. And as you know, you can't only have 4 people in a meeting because you got to meet with everybody at one time. They said, don't worry, you can stay and you can do it virtually. And I'm like, okay, so it's March in Belfast and it's 35 degrees and raining and it's sunny and 75 in South Carolina. And I'm going to do this virtually, so I left. And anyway.
So I thought we'd start off I suppose the obvious starting point, Mick, is we've got the primaries kind of going through now, and on the Republican side, Trump seems to be taking a real. Is it done and dusted? Is there still going to be changes? What do you think? And where are things with the Republicans, and where's Trump going to find himself?
First things first. Some of this is going to sound really, really strange if you don't understand how our system works. In that, the only requirements for being president are that you are 35 years old and a natural-born citizen. That's it. Okay, those are the 2 requirements. We had a bill, for example, a couple years back that said the president had to acknowledge he had read a bill before he signed off on it. Congress is going to do the same thing. That was deemed by scholars to be unconstitutional because it would imply literacy. Okay, and we don't have a literacy requirement. 35 and a natural-born citizen, which means you can run from jail, you can win from jail, and you can serve from jail, we think. So you have to sort of suspend all of this, is it really possible to be president in jail? The answer is, we think yes. So with that as an introduction, Trump is, I still put him at about 90-95% chance to win. There's this very, very small undercurrent of if he is convicted and is actually sitting in jail, that it might, for one of the rare times in my country's history, make the electability issue a real issue. Ordinarily, electability is something that people use when they know they can't win on something else. I know you like this person better than you like me, but I can actually win the election, so vote for me even though you don't like me. That always fails. Mitt Romney tried it and it just never worked. That might work if the person you're talking about is actually sitting in an orange jumpsuit behind bars. The chances of him getting convicted are probably fairly good in Georgia. Keep in mind, a lot of the things you might see on TV, I don't know. I know a little bit about the coverage. I do some media here. A lot of the legal action against him is civil and not criminal. So the thing that's ongoing, for example, right now in New York, the worst thing that could happen to him is he can lose money. He cannot go to jail. The criminal proceedings are mostly the criminal proceeding in Georgia and then the one in Washington, D.C. over election interference. Most of the other stuff is civil. If he were convicted and in jail, that might move the needle. The chances of him getting convicted and going to jail before the election are relatively low. So that's why I say I put it in the low single digits in terms of a percentage of him not being the nominee, but there is that chance. All the attention right now is on who's ever running for second, and we don't pay 2 places in the U.S. It's winner take all in politics. Nikki Haley is doing very well. She's doubled from 7 to 14%. She's still losing to Donald Trump by 40 points. So the media is trying to make a story where none exists because otherwise there's not much coverage to be had. So you will continue to hear about DeSantis versus Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, Tim Scott. My good friend dropped out this week. But generally speaking, they're all just trying to figure out a way to stay around long enough to see what happens if Trump does end up in prison. Short of that, I cannot imagine him not being the nominee.
So, some of the people watching, some of the team guests here may not quite appreciate how the system works in the US, in your point about winner takes all.
Right.
So from what you're saying, do you think there's no possibility that Nikki Haley, DeSantis, Chris Christie would come together, come to an agreement, so it ends up being Donald Trump versus another, which is probably, I guess, the only way that he doesn't get the nomination as things stand?
Even if they did, we don't have the mechanism like I think you folks do here, where the party can sort of say, you're our person, right? We don't do that. It's the primary is what the primary is, and the folks get to vote. I believe at one point, and I actually talked with a lot of the candidates about this 4 or 5 months ago, if they had come together and run as a team, DeSantis as president, Nikki Haley as vice president, Chris Christie as attorney general, and said, we are a slate running against Donald Trump, maybe. But right now, I've seen some of the polling data I've seen has them up in the upper 50s. So even if you put all of the folks against him in one side of the ledger, he'd still be winning. Plus, traditionally, our primary system has not been winner take all. So if I go to New Hampshire, if I go to South Carolina, if I go to Iowa, and I win 52% of the vote, I might win 65% of the delegates. Okay, Trump's team has actually worked very, very hard to change that over the course of the last 6 years, to the point where now a lot of our states are in fact winner take all, just like the presidential election will be in November. If again in November, if I win Arizona by 1 vote, I get all of the electoral votes for president. That was not the case in the primaries. It is the case now. California, for example, used to be, California doesn't make any difference in a general election. It makes a great deal of difference in a primary because there's just so many people there. California is now either all winner take all or close to winner take all, and Donald Trump is going to win all of those delegates. So even if you look at the national polling and think, well, maybe there's a chance, if he's hovering around 50%, does that mean 50% of the people, would it be a close race? It still doesn't look like a close race.
And with that in mind, and Donald Trump as well, if not better than most, is he likely to look at that and say, right, well, let's end this early and do a deal with somebody like Nikki Haley or Chris Christie, or to run with him to just end all this so that he's got that clear run?
I had a really, really good idea about a year ago, and there was talk of Mar-a-Lago that they would actually pay attention. The president and I have not talked since, actually not talked since the election. I've especially not talked to him since January 6th. But we have an understanding. I don't say really nasty things about him. He tends not to say really nasty things about me. He did one time. I said something on CNN. They said, "Do you think, why are you going to work for him in the next election?" I said, "No." And they said, "Why?" I said, "Because he's going to lose." And he didn't like that. So he says, "If anybody knows anything about Mick Mulvaney, about losing, it's Mick Mulvaney. He's a born loser." He tweeted that out. And I tweeted out the number 4, and somebody called me up and said, "What was that?" And by the way, it was silence after that. There was no exchange. It wasn't a Twitter battle. It was just, Mick Mulvaney is a born loser. 4. Why didn't it shut down? Like, that's the number of times he hired me. So it's really hard to sort of say that. So we have a mutual assured destruction sort of policy. But the idea I had was that he would be doing vice presidential apprentice. I'm going to be the nominee. I know I'm going to be the nominee. You know what? I'm going to let you folks, the American people, choose my vice president. And whoever comes in, I'm not going to be in any of the primaries, but I'm going to get all the delegates. Whoever comes in second will be my vice president. I thought it was genius. There was some discussion that maybe they were paying attention to it. Here's the difficulty that they have. They have, the word from inside the campaign is that they are leaning very heavily towards a woman as vice president. Not 100%, but in that 75% likelihood. That shortens the list dramatically. Originally, the big 3 were going to be Kristi Noem from South Dakota, Nikki Haley from South Carolina, and Kim Reynolds from Iowa. People who mention Nikki Haley don't understand it's a very unusual relationship between the president and Nikki. They don't trust each other. That's not a killer in our business. It's not a deal breaker, but it doesn't move you to the top of the list. I think if Donald Trump really, really thought he needed to have a really solid woman on the ticket to get him over the finish line, he would look at Nikki Haley, even though they have a quasi-adversarial relationship. Kim Reynolds came out, she's the governor of Iowa, and she endorsed, in a very, very high-profile endorsement, Ron DeSantis for president. That probably moves her to the bottom of the list. Keep in mind, it very rarely takes you off the list with Donald Trump. Very few people in this world are completely persona non grata with Trump. You can always get yourself back in good with him if 2 things happen. Number 1, he perceives you as being good for him, and you are obsequious enough to get back into the family. If those 2 things happen, you can come back in. There's a very short list of people who I think couldn't get back in. Mike Pence probably could, Michael Cohen, that's about it. So Kim Reynolds could probably come back in the family. but I continue to think that the leading candidate is Kristi Noem from South Dakota. They get along very well. They've worked together when I was in the White House. I like Kristi. She and I were in Congress together for 6 years. Very capable woman, very attractive woman, really, really good on television. Has been a tremendous marketer of her very small state during COVID, did a really nice job during COVID. So she's generally well liked, and she would fit into the team fairly well. You hear other names every now and then. Tucker Carlson's name, the television personality, has come up a couple of times. Vivek Ramaswamy seems to think he's going to be vice president. That's not going to happen. But if you throw it all in the mix, if I'm a betting man, and I am, my money's on Kristi Noem for vice president.
And if we're working on that basis, so is there a world in which, with everything that's going on, at any point Trump says, actually, I'm not going to run? And I guess I know the answer to that. And assuming the answer is no, how I assume that the Trump team see all of this prosecution of him, civil and criminal, seems to be helping his polling with different demographics, seeing that he's the anti-establishment candidate again. So that's helping him. And if that's the case, can he be beaten by Biden, and will it be Biden?
Oh, that's 4 questions at one time. So break it down real quickly. Is there anything that would make him not run? If his health was bad, he would not run. His brand is very important to him. If he was perceiving that people were perceiving him the same way they are perceiving Joe Biden right now, that might give him pause. If people were making fun of him for his inability to get up and down a stairway, making fun of him for his inability now to remember things. By the way, that narrative has started in just the last 2 or 3 weeks. DeSantis has started to mention Trump's age. The Democrats have started to try and level the playing field between him and Biden. So that's out there, but it's still a very low likelihood. But that is the one thing I think that would have him step back and say, I need to find an excuse to get out of this. I'm never going to have people make fun of me. My brand is what will survive me after my death, okay? That is his legacy. Your next question, would he drop out? So probably no. Was Biden going to be the Democrat nominee? Yes, but whereas it was a 98% likelihood 6 weeks ago, it's down in the low 80s right now. There's been some chatter inside Washington for a while about Biden's abilities. In fact, I was surprised when I was talking to a couple of the Americans here tonight. I think one of your James's girlfriends is from Indiana, so I apologize for retelling the story, but there was a story in Indiana about this time last year, and I'm not sure it got much attention here. Judging by their reaction, it didn't. Trump was speaking at an event in the state of Indiana on the commissioning of a new bridge or a road or something like that. Not Trump, excuse me, Biden was speaking. And as he always does, gets up front. Thank you, Senator so-and-so for coming. Thank you, Senator so-and-so for coming. Congressman. Where's Congresswoman Walorski? I know she's a huge fan of this. I don't know if we're in her district or not, but she talked to me about this. She was excited when we passed the bill. I know she must be running late. She was dead, and she had died in a very, very high-profile traffic accident about 2 weeks before, and Biden had actually spoken at one of the events for her. That sort of raised that giant red flag for the first time, and that's when you first started to hear the chatter about maybe this isn't going to go so well. Fast forward to, 4 weeks ago, David Ignatius is a journalist, and he is about as as a heavily Democrat institution as you can get in my country. And he wrote a piece in the Washington Post. So here's their preferred mouthpiece from their preferred platform saying Biden needs to stand down and so does Kamala Harris. Okay, David Axelrod, who ran both of Barack Obama's campaigns, said something even more aggressive than that just a couple weeks ago. So that debate is out there. So a year ago, 6 months ago, Biden was an absolute lock, no conversation about him not being the candidate. That is changing very rapidly right now. And you already see Democrats, under the guise of running in 2028, Gavin Newsom comes to mind, essentially saying, well, I'm really just preparing for 2028, but if you need me at the last minute, I'm ready. Fascinating part about that is, I said before that the party mechanisms, we don't have a party mechanism in my country to say, you're our person. There's actually an exception to that, which is if the person drops out after the convention, then there are mechanisms. You don't have to go back and do another primary. The party leaders would get together and say, okay, who is our person? By the way, Kamala Harris's name very, very rarely comes up in that conversation. So she's already sort of been kicked to the curb. There was some discussion about replacing her vice president. That would never happen. So let's assume for sake of this discussion it is Trump versus Biden. 6 months ago, it would have been 80% likelihood of Biden. Now I think it's a 52-48 race in favor of Trump. for a variety of reasons, all sort of coming together very quickly. Number one, Biden's age really, really is an issue. Inflation really is an issue. Keep in mind, most people don't follow politics as closely as people in this room. The people who vote know what stuff costs, and they're always going to blame the party that's in power when things are more expensive. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Yes. You get reelected? No, you don't. Okay? That has really started to dig. And then the last thing is Trump, who is one of the most, I've met some truly, truly gifted politicians in my life. I don't know Bill Clinton very well, but I know him. Lindsey Graham is a fabulous politician. Donald Trump is the best gut politician I've ever met in my entire life, and what he's been able to do is make himself out to be a victim of a weaponized government that's coming to get you, okay? And that is resonating not just with anti-establishment people, it's resonating with centrist voters. The cases against him, and again, I'm a critic of the president more than as much as I am a supporter of the president, probably more so. The cases against him in New York on these hush money payments to the porn star are so outrageously weak that even Democrats have defended Trump against the charges. Okay? The thing that's going on right now in Manhattan about the fraud that his businesses committed when they took out their loans. Please allow this to settle in. Not a single bank has ever complained about this. All of them got paid. Most of them got paid early. Not a single insurance company has ever complained about having to about him paying lower premiums than he otherwise would have. No one complained about it except the democratically elected attorney general. So when Trump gets up and says this is a political hit job, there's a lot of evidence for that, and that is sinking in. So you put those three things together: Biden's age, inflation, Trump's ability to take this negative and turn it into a positive, and he's closed the gap very, very quickly. I think if the election were today, he would likely win, and the polling data, although you can't trust polling data, would tend to back that up. We don't, polling here's, I remember what y'all went through with Brexit. I know you know as well as we do that polling doesn't work. What we look at, and don't worry about national polls in my country, because again, we don't elect people nationally. You're looking at the polls from Iowa, from New Hampshire, from South Carolina, in the swing states. But any poll will show you a trend. So if a poll comes out and says you're 52 and I'm 48, as far as I'm concerned, we're tied. But if a poll comes out 52-48 and next time it's 54-46, then I'm thinking you're doing better than I am. I'm still not convinced you're beating me by that much, but you're going in the right direction. I'm going in the wrong direction. And right now, Trump is going in the right direction and Biden's going in the wrong direction.
And has that shifted much since the midterms? Because arguably in the midterms, the Trump sort of preferred candidates in a few areas sort of underperformed, and the Republicans didn't get the results. And I was out there earlier in the year where the Republicans were really expecting to just dominate, and that didn't come off in that way. And is that because Trump's candidates weren't the right people, or what happened there in your opinion?
It's a fact. I wish in another lifetime, if I had come back, I don't want to come back as a politician. I want to come back as somebody who owns the media, because it allows you to make up stories, and people believe it to be true. And they may not make things up, although we can talk about that later. But I can certainly craft a narrative. What is the narrative? The Republicans got pummeled earlier this month, right? Not true. They did lose in Ohio on this abortion referendum, and that bears a separate conversation. But if you actually go read the language is not the most aggressive pro-abortion life you're ever going to meet. It talks about the child, not the fetus or not the embryo. So there's actually some pro-life language in there, and it did lose. Put that aside for a second. They won Mississippi when the Democrats thought that they were going to have a chance to win the governor's race there. It was the exact same margin it was 4 years ago. They did win in Kentucky by roughly the same margin they did 4 years ago. It's really hard to beat popular incumbent Democrats in my country, regardless of what party they're in. So Mississippi, Kentucky, completely nothing burgers, right? Virginia, they were expecting a huge win. Okay? They didn't take control of the two state legislatures, the House and the Senate in the state of Virginia. About 5,000 votes would have changed that outcome statewide. The races were extraordinarily tight. In fact, the Republicans lost 3 House seats and won a Senate seat. They just didn't win enough to take control of that legislature. 5,000, 10,000 votes go the other way in critical districts, and the Republicans have had a huge night, and it's a stunning win for Glenn Youngkin, and people are talking about him running for president. So I get what the narrative is. The country is still very, very closely divided. You're going to see close races throughout, all the way through, and all the primaries and up to November. So I know what the narrative is, that the Republicans are sort of on the back foot. I don't see it like that, except when it comes to abortion. They are having difficulty messaging that.
Okay, so one of the things that's obviously happened recently is the change of speaker
Yes.
I'm moving the speaker.
Followed it.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting from a UK point of view, and having been chairman of the Conservative Party, I'm interested in psephology and polling and all of these
your
things.
Leader a couple of times?
We've had a few changes. Well, we like to refresh and give everybody an opportunity. And there's but one of the things that I've always looked at when you look at polling here in the UK, and I think it applies to both parties, certainly for the Conservative Party, there is a very strong connection, in my opinion, when the party is seen to be divided and infighting and criticising itself, our polling just plummets. Now, people can argue it's over a policy or this, that, but actually what is always common is there is a perception in the public that we're infighting, and our polling just goes down dramatically off the back of that, whoever the leader has been, and there's a wide range of choice. With that in mind, is it similar in the US in the sense of that the situation with the change of speaker and then not being able to find a speaker who everybody could support until you've obviously got Johnson in there now? Does that have a similar impact in the US, or do most people switch off to that? What does that mean for the Republicans and how they're perceived?
It's similar, but one of the key differences, and the reason it's not exactly the same, and I would think it's less impactful in the US, is because when you folks do it, you do it with the leader of your party. The leader of my party is Donald Trump. The leader of their party is Joe Biden, who are not really engaged in this, right? I mean, Trump did say some nice things about some folks who were running for speaker and then didn't lose. So there was that little back narrative on that. But generally speaking, it is perceived as a tempest in a teapot because most of our folks don't know who Congress is. When I ran in Congress for the first time in 2010, when you do, and you've done this, you do polling data, and I did a major poll the weekend before my election in 2010. One of the things you poll is your name recognition. Do people know who you are? And my name recognition, November of 2010, was about 96%. 6 weeks later, it was 40. Same group of people. Okay, people pay attention for a very short period of time, then they go about leading their own lives again. No one knows who's in Congress. No one knows who Mike Johnson is. No one knew who Kevin McCarthy was for the most part. Every now and then, when there's one party in charge of the White House and the other party's in charge of the House, because the higher profile role is the Speaker of the House, not the President of the Senate, you can make that Speaker of the House the leader of the Democrat Party. That happened during Donald Trump's time in the White House when Nancy Pelosi was the leader of the Democrat Party, right? Because Barack Obama had gone off in the sunset and so forth. So you can get that dynamic where people will pay attention to what's happening in the legislature, but now it's not typical, and now is not one of those times. The people who are Republicans follow Trump, people who are Democrats follow Biden, and most folks don't really care what's happening in Congress.
And I think you've been on the record quite recently talking about one of the things the US could look at or consider is what we have here in the UK with the Speaker. Yes. It's technically not moves away from party political. Yeah. Now, there'll be some Conservatives who might look at that with a slightly tongue-in-cheek opinion of John Bercow's period as Speaker and whether he was entirely non-political. But do you think that really would work? Is that something that could be picked up? And actually, on the flip side, is there anything you've picked up when you've been here that you think we should be looking at in terms of how the US system works?
I actually like your system better. You folks have rules. We don't. You have to be really geeky to follow this, but
if you don't like our rules, we can change them.
Okay, but can you change them on every single piece of legislation?
Technically, yes.
Okay, we do it on every single piece of legislation. You cannot bring a piece of legislation to the floor of the House. There's a couple very small exceptions called suspension. So if you want to name a post office and nobody objects, you can do it, right? But generally speaking, every single piece of legislation has to have a separate rule for it to come to the floor. You don't have Robert's Rules of Orders. You don't have Jefferson's Manual. You don't have you guys have got hundreds of years of traditions, right? We don't have that. It's simply whatever the Speaker says. That is very frustrating to both majority parties to think about the Speaker of the House who says, okay, tomorrow we're doing this bill, and we're going to debate this bill tomorrow for 2 hours. You get to speak for 3 minutes. You get to speak for 2 minutes. You don't get to speak at all. You get to vote, but you don't get to say anything. And your amendment is going to be okay. We'll vote on your amendment. Your amendment, we're not going to vote on. I don't like your amendment, so not even going to consider that. We do that on every single piece of legislation. So it really, and having been on the short end of that more often than not, it does make members of Congress feel like they're disenfranchised, which can sort of make them angry at their own leadership. Republicans are a lot more vocal about being upset with their leaders. Democrats are just as upset. They're just not as vocal about it. When you work so hard to get elected to this very high position, very high office, and then are told, please sit in the back, you don't get to talk for 3 years, and we're going to tell you how to vote, that can really backfire on people. So at least under a system, when I was in the state government, we actually had rules. Now, if it was a tie, the majority party would typically win that, and they should, because it's a majoritarian type of body. But even if you were a minority within the majority, if you're a fiscal conservative within a sort of a liberal Republican Party or a centrist Republican Party, you felt like you could have your say. And every now and then you might get a small win, and that would sort of make you a better team player because you didn't feel like you were being taken for granted. Our system could use a good overhaul. I did write that piece, hopeful that somebody would take a look at it. We actually talked about it when John Boehner left in 2015 for a brief period of time, but we didn't get very far with it. We were just too ingrained in the two-party system. But it's a fascinating academic, intellectual conversation to have for people who actually pay attention to this stuff.
One of the look, I'm very fortunate to be a patron of the Adam Smith Institute. My fellow patron, Nadim Zahawi, always argues never bet against America economically. Yes. His theory, which I have a huge support for, is that one of the real benefits that America has economically is because the sheer scale of America and the state system and the independence the states have, that competition between states drives competition, which drives the free market and drives innovation, et cetera, and that's why the economy moves. I appreciate some people this year, I've seen some economists writing that one of the reasons the American economy is doing so well this year was Taylor Swift's tour, and there is an interesting dynamic between her tour venues and where the economy has risen, which is hugely impressive. What do you think the UK can learn economically? Bear in mind, obviously, the whole of the UK is smaller than some American states, but around that support for, that championing of, and that celebration of the free market. Actually, to be fair, both Democrats and certainly Republicans have.
Yeah, but it's sort of hard to recreate, right? I mean, it is, because it's that federalist system that we've got that creates that crucible, that competition between the states. By the way, there's large portions of my federal government that don't like it. The Democrats really, really don't like it. You saw this debate internationally on the international minimum corporate tax. Yeah. They didn't want people, picking where to go. That we face that every single day. There's already discussions within the Democrat Party of why is it that Texas doesn't have an income, Florida doesn't have an income tax, but California does. That's really not fair to California. Why don't we make Florida collect a tax, or why don't we at least add a surcharge to them to level the playing field? You heard that level playing field a lot. So it is hard to recreate. I don't know enough about how y'all are structured here to know if you can even come close to doing that. One of the things it does do, though, is it can force, under certain circumstances, the federal government to be less heavy-handed. When something works in a state, it makes it harder for the federal government to do the opposite, because there's examples of things actually working. So folks are looking at Florida, who's deregulating. Our states, the regulatory climate and regulatory environment in the states is really quite weird because, and we've talked about this in terms of the UK-US free trade deal. You folks are actually talking to individual states now, because you finally figured out that while the federal government is really important, the states have 100% of the regulation over the practice of law. About 90% of the regulation of the sale and management of insurance. And you go down the list, even some financial services are regulated by the state. So you can cut a free trade deal with an individual state, and it's like cutting a free trade deal with a separate sovereign state. And so there are examples where if you can find something that works at one level, you can use it to sort of develop at another. But I don't think you guys are ever going to be able to recreate the federal system, because you'd have to let Scotland go. So.
As someone who's been chairman and is still a member of the Conservative and Unionist Party, I think it's the union stand together is, I think, quite important for the whole of the UK. I'm going to give you a fair warning. I've got one more, maybe two more questions for Mick, and I'm going to come to all of you to see if you've got any questions. So if you're thinking of a question up, you've got a few seconds, then I'm going to turn to you. One of the things I've always found when I'm talking to people that sometimes can be interesting is the bits that behind the scenes that people don't get to see, don't realise go on, don't know about, that how the machine of government works. So, Mick, obviously, in your time as chief of staff of the White House, tell us about something that you think was interesting that people wouldn't know about how the White House works or how Trump worked as president, that is broadcastable as well.
the behind the scenes stuff. The stories. I'll tell you two. One about how he works, and then one about how the White House works. So if you'll indulge me for a few minutes. The man is a true extrovert, and I don't know if you know anybody like that. I had never met one, and I mean a textbook case. And that extrovert was described to me. Introvert is somebody that loses energy when he or she is out in public. Extrovert is someone who draws energy from that. We got off an airplane from, I don't know, Vietnam. Great airplane, by the way, beautiful airplane, great place to be if you're the president. Really slow, and there's only one bed on the plane, and it's not mine. So, I'm sleeping on a gym mat underneath the table. We fly 30 hours back from wherever it is we were. We land at 11 o'clock in the morning, and we have a speech at 2 o'clock that afternoon. And I remember the last hour of the flight, boss, listen, we can change this, we can cancel. It's a 2 o'clock speaking gig on a Saturday. It's a bad time slot, because I know he cares about that. He's like, no, we don't cancel. Let's do it. So we drag ourselves off this airplane, and he's destroyed, and I'm destroyed, and everybody else is just wrecked from this trip. I slept for an hour on my sofa in the office. He went to the residence for an hour. I sent everybody home except for Stephen Miller, the guy who writes the speeches. And then we drag ourselves back in the helicopter to go over to the Washington National Harbor to give this speech in front of 5,000 screaming fans. He talked for an hour and a half. And literally bounded off the stage and ran into the helicopter and stayed up and worked until 11 o'clock at night. I've never seen anything like it. I was wrecked for 3 days, and so he only sleeps about 4 hours a night. I have known some people like that. He sleeps from about 2 o'clock in the morning to about 6 o'clock in the morning, and he does this he would sleep by taking 5-minute naps watching cable news, and then would wake up and be completely refreshed. It's unbelievable. I've never seen anybody like it.
Just on that, the tweets and the Twitter, was him?
Still, okay, yes, so here's what you look at. If it's between the hours of 11 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock at night, it's typically him and somebody else, okay? Dan Scavino, his social media director. If it's after 7 o'clock at night and between 7 a.m. and 11 a.m., it's absolutely 100% him. Absolutely, he did his own social media, so I don't follow him on X or Twitter or whatever. I did have somebody do that in the office because I got tired of people saying, "Did you see what the president tweeted?" I'm like, if I did that, I do that all day. So we actually did have somebody dedicated to watching his thing, and some of the do watch the times on his tweets and stuff that he comes out with now. It's really interesting to see how many of them are done at 1 and 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, because he is up. That is really him. The other, can I tell one of my story?
Yes.
So we're going to, I can't remember, we're going to the G20 in Osaka, Japan. And we're flying back to stop off in Seoul, South Korea to meet with President Moon on the way. And we're going over the thing with the president. And he goes, "Oh, we're going to South Korea." And he goes, "Yeah. How cool would it be if we stopped, off to see Kim in North Korea?" Like, Mr. President, it's difficult to do that. It takes us about 3 months to schedule this move of the president to a friendly nation for an international conference, okay? We're not going to North Korea on a whim in 24 hours, but we are. Anyway, so I get off the plane. We're at the conference. Mike Pompeo's talking to me. Mike Pompeo, who does follow the president on Twitter, looks up and goes, "Okay, we have a problem." I said, "What's that?" He shows it to me. President has tweeted out, "How cool would it be if I stopped off to see President Kim or Chairman Kim on the way back?" And Mike goes, "What do you want to do about it?" I'm like, "We're not doing anything about it." And he's like, "Okay, that's fine." So we said nothing until about an hour later. Mike walks up to me and says, we have a problem. I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Well, the Swiss, who are interlocutors with the North Koreans because we don't have formal relationships with them, the Swiss want to know if that's a real invitation or not." And Mike and I just say, "Sure, why not?" Thinking there's no chance this is going to happen. Okay. An hour later, they come back. They said they have accepted. We are going to meet the next afternoon at the DMZ with Chairman Kim. This is impossible to do. It cannot be done. Okay? We all know it's impossible to do. And we don't tell the president any of this because the last thing we want to do is get his hopes up and then know that it's not going to happen. So Mike and I call in the head of the guy who handles this type of stuff, the White House military operation, and say, "Look, we know this can't happen, but go off and see what you can do. So if the president finds out about it, we can tell him we really tried to do it. And I want you to really try to do it. Don't try and do it." Okay? About 8 hours later, he calls me back. He says, I think we can do this. I'm like, no, we can't. He goes, yes, I think we can do this. He says, but give me another couple of hours. So we go to bed that night. We get up the next morning. We fly to Seoul. We meet with Chairman President Moon from South Korea. And then I get a call from my guy up at the DMZ. He goes, we're good to go. It's done. It's locked in. Let's do it. I'm like, okay, let's do this. So as we're leaving, and I said, Mr. President, I have good news. He says, yeah, you remember that tweet you put out? I said, yeah. I said, well, they've accepted, and we've managed to set up a meeting for you at the DMZ with Chairman Kim. Oh, that's great. Let's go. So we get in the airplane, and what I know about the details is what I have just shared with you, which is we are going to the DMZ to meet with Chairman Kim. And that's all I know, okay? And that's all the president knows, because that's pretty much all anybody knows at this point, except that we are going, and we're going to make this try to work. We get in the car, we drive up, and I'll have to, it's a visual thing, so I really feel bad for the people in the back, but if you've ever seen the pictures of the DMZ, what you can't see are the two big buildings. There's a big building here, and a big building here, and the border comes right down the middle between these, and there's four shotgun shacks where they negotiated the cessation of hostilities in the 1950s, okay? And in the middle there, the border is an actual concrete wall about that high. We pull up in the car to this building. We walk to the edge of this building in the glass sort of entryway, looking out over no man's land and the DMZ at the North Korean building on the far side. And you could see the shotgun shacks and the boundary. And the guy who set this up for us gives essentially this briefing to the president, and I'm not exaggerating by much. Mr. President, here's what's going to happen. Okay, when we give the signal, you are going to walk out of this building. Chairman Kim's going to walk out at the exact same time. You will walk together. You will meet at the border. Okay? He will extend his hand. You will shake his hand, okay? Across the border, you will turn. There'll be pictures taken. He will then invite you to cross over the wall. You will step over the concrete wall. You will shake pictures again and take pictures. You will then invite him back over the border into the South Korean building so that we can have the meetings. You got it? He goes, I got it. Let's go. That's the extent of the briefing, okay? That was it. The signal goes off. Trump walks out. Kim walks out, they meet, they shake hands, they take the picture. Kim says, come on over, President steps over, they shake hands, take the picture, and they walk to that building. And I'm sitting there with the head of the Secret Service, I'm like, hey guys, what do we do now? And they said, technically nothing. I'm like, we are losing the President of the United States. And they said, well, boss, what we didn't have a chance to tell you is that the deal we cut with the North Koreans was that we got the President, the photographer, the translator, and one Secret Service agent, and those are the only 4 people who have permission to cross that wall. If we send anybody else, we are invading North Korea. And I'm sitting there going, I'm now the chief of staff who has lost the President of the United States. Okay? And we're just, I'm looking at Mike Pompeo like we need to find starting new jobs really, really soon. You know, where's Mike Pence? We actually had that thought go to, where's Mike Pence right now? Because we figured he could go in this building, we never see him again. And I'm watching him as he walks away, and he goes to the base of the steps outside this North Korean building, and he starts gesticulating. And then he slaps Kim on the hand, on the shoulder, says, come on back, and they walk across, step across, go in this building. And we had a tremendous meeting. It was a huge success. Just a huge, it was a diplomatic success, a PR success. It was one of the highlights of my time as the chief. And one of the reasons I enjoy telling the stories when we let Trump be Trump. The man has all sorts of faults. We all do. He has all sorts of strengths. Many of us do, okay? This was one of his strengths, and he was, again, one of the best gut politicians ever. No one else in the world would have been able to do this on 24 hours' notice, and it was a huge success. This is the epilogue to the story. We're on the plane, and everybody's, we're all high-fiving, had a great trip. He's excited, we're excited. The press is giving us good coverage, which they never do. And it's later on, and everybody else starts to filter out to go to bed. And I'm sitting there, I say, hey, boss, look, I can ask a question. He's like, yeah. What the hell was that with the building over there? He goes, did you see that building? Did you see? That was the ugliest building I've ever seen. So I walk over, and I say, Kim, come on. Before we go meet, let's go look at this. You guys have got some of the best real estate in the world. You got China up here, you got South Korea down here, you got coasts down both sides. Beautiful country. You could be doing casinos, you could be doing golf courses, you could be doing resorts. But you can't do it with architecture like that, because that is crap. That is a beautiful building. Let's go have our meeting right now. And that was the story about why he walked over to the other thing. So, anyway.
Great, thank you for that. Who's got the first question?
Thank you. What would a Trump second term look like compared to a Trump first term? Differences, similarities?
Yeah, I just wrote a piece on this for the Hill magazine, the Hill newspaper, and it's a really interesting question. My guess is he's going to have a difficult time getting people to work for him because, excuse me, he's going to have a difficult time getting people to work for him who can get confirmed by the Senate. I don't know if he's ever going to be able to find an attorney general that is acceptable to him that can get confirmed by the Senate. Keep in mind, our Senate confirms way too many positions, but all of the cabinet. I was Senate confirmed when I was the budget director. Back in the first term, when Trump came into office, the inner circle was, you know, the chairman of ExxonMobil and the former president of Goldman Sachs, right? That was the kind of people he was attracting. I don't think he's going to be able to get that quality of person the next time around. And the people who are around him right now, who are sort of his inner circle of advisors, are not confirmable. They're just not. So I don't know who becomes cabinet secretaries. That means that the people who are going to be doing most of the advising and the decision making will be the people that do not need Senate confirmation. The chief of staff does not need Senate confirmation. There's a couple of other positions, the domestic policy, national security advisor. Secretary of State needs Senate confirmation. National security advisor does not. They overlap. So my guess is those non-confirmed positions will be playing larger and larger roles. That means that the administration will be much more White House driven than it was even in the first term. Trump loves a flat organization. The Trump organization he loves direct reports to him. Okay, he doesn't like hierarchies. Okay, it's him and everybody else, and that's how he runs his business. That's how he ran the first administration. That will be highlighted in the second administration. What does that mean in terms of policy? How does it change from the first term? I think it will be slightly more populist, and I'm inclined to think slightly more conservative, though when I wrote this piece, someone wrote me back and said, no, it's going to be the exact opposite. It will be more moderate, because Trump, by his nature, is more moderate. Trump is not a hardcore, right-wing conservative. Trump would not be in my part of the party. He'd be more of he's in that center, sort of Clinton Democrat type of center part. He's not an ideologue when it comes to a lot of policies. He believes in lower taxes, lower regulation, higher tariffs, and I think that's where you'll see him focus. He will come back to his true sort of center. I want more tariffs. I want a stronger border. I want more military spending. I want lower taxes. I want less regulation. And that's where we'll be spending most of our time. It could get really, really difficult because a president should be entitled to have a cabinet, and the Senate, especially if it's controlled by Democrats, will be in a position to deny him every single member of his cabinet. And that would create an interesting constitutional, not challenge, but a constitutional controversy as to whether or not a president can be a president without a cabinet. But you might see that actually happen.
Sorry, that was loud. Two sort of things that sort of spring to mind from what you've sort of spoken about there. And the first one is, what was Trump actually like as an administrator? Because you talked about him working until about like 11 p.m. at night. We obviously see him doing the rallies, we see him doing the social media stuff.
Yeah.
How is he actually doing the sort of official, boring paperwork sort of role? And secondly, I think a question that obviously comes up when you're talking about South Korea, Japan, etc., but something we haven't really touched on. How much does a potential war over Taiwan loom over any, Trump second term, indeed, over the next 4 or 5 years of American politics?
So I think sorry, just to say, I need to explain the question because of the recording that we're doing. So I think the question is around how Trump works administratively, his style of work, and also the issues with Taiwan. And I think it's an interesting question because sometimes perception and reality, I think, as Mick was just explaining, the way Trump worked those kind of hours. I experienced this with Boris, actually.
Really?
Boris was, I would get phone calls as a Secretary of State from Boris at all hours, because he was working, his attention to detail on things with Northern Ireland was way beyond what I think some of the press and because of people would perceive. His understanding, and late night and weekends, and that work ethic was different to the perception. So I think it's a really interesting question with Trump.
I'll get the question in a second, but you've not told me that before about Boris, but I remember sitting in, where were we? Where was the G7 in south of France someplace? Biarritz. And we're having a meeting with you folks in the morning, and Boris is late for the meeting. And Boris comes in, more disheveled than ordinary. His hair is still wet. His tie is down to here. He was late because he was in an ocean swim. And I can't do the accent, so I'm terribly sorry, but I was swimming in the ocean. And, and it's 100 miles an hour. It's a whirling dervish. And I remember looking at this guy, thinking to myself, this is the mini-me for Donald Trump. This is a Russian doll. These two people could be related. They have so many similar sort of mannerisms and capabilities. It's funny that you say that he was up in the middle of the night, but we'll talk about that later. You come back and Trump and his management style, administrative. People think, a lot of people want to accuse him of being not intelligent. That's not true. He's really, really smart when it comes to stuff he cares about, and stuff he doesn't care about, he doesn't really care about. I'll give you an example. When I was a budget director, before I was the chief, we were going through, one of the things you have to do as a budget director, you go through the president, how you want to change the proposed federal spending. And it takes, in a good year, it takes 3 or 4 months to do this. And I went down, we always have a list of controversial cuts, things we want to cut that we know the press is going to pick up on, and we need the president to know about this and make sure he's okay with it so that we don't blindside the president and say, you're cutting this. And he's like, I don't want to cut that. So we go down the list, and the first time through the list is 16 pages long. And I'm like, no, President, this is a big deal. It has to do foreign aid, say, for the sake of discussion, to another country. And we're cutting it from 18 million to 16 million, okay? Which is a nothing burger in our budget. But I knew it was going to get attention, not because of the amount of money, but because of where the money was going. And he says, I'm okay with that. 6 weeks go by. And I say, now, Mr. President, we got this list again. We'll go through this again. Just make sure you're cool with this. We're taking this from 18 million down to about 15.8. And he goes, now, last month you told me it was 16. What's the change? Yeah, that's $200,000 in a federal budget of $4 trillion. He cared about it. He paid attention to it. He's really good with numbers. He locked in. Stuff he didn't care about, he didn't care about. And if you saw him on TV talk about stuff he didn't care about, it came across as just not caring about it, because he did. His style was interesting. He managed by conflict. And I've seen other people do this successfully. I don't do it, but this style of management exists, which is that, especially on the things that he does not have a natural center of gravity on. I mentioned the 5 or 6 things he really cares about, but on the other stuff, he's like, okay, let's talk about it. And what he would do is try to get as many people in a room. I used to literally joke that I was selling tickets to trade meetings, okay? Because we'd have 20 and 30 people in the Oval Office, and the Oval Office is dramatically smaller than this room. Yeah, it is. And so at the office we are literally packing people into the Oval Office to have a debate about trade. And he wants to hear from both sides of the people, to the point, both sides of the argument, to the point where people are yelling at each other. I mean, we very nearly came to blows at times over trade policy. People in the audience, and he's sitting behind the desk, being sort of the judge and the arbiter and the mediator. I never watched the television program The Apprentice, but I'm told that's sort of how the thing ran. So again, that's his nature. It worked when we had really smart, sane people in the office. As the time went on, we had fewer capable people and more crazy people. I told you before that at the beginning of the administration, we had this chairman of ExxonMobil and the president of Goldman Sachs. At the end of the administration, one of his senior advisors sells pillows on television at night. That's not an exaggeration. Okay, Mike Lindell. Okay, his trade advisor got caught fabricating a person that he used as a resource for his academic papers. Okay, again, not made up. That system of conflict, managing by conflict, can work if you put the right people in the room. But if the people in the room only want to figure out what you want so they can tell you exactly what you want to hear, the system breaks down. And I'm absolutely convinced that's one of the reasons that January 6th took place, is that the people saying, you lost. I'm really sorry to say that, but you lost. Were not in the room. Now, the president is responsible for his own advisors, and it's entirely possible that somebody said, you lost, and he said, get the hell out of here. Okay? So ultimately, the buck stops with him. And I don't know the process by which only the nut jobs were in the Oval Office at the end of the day, but only the nut jobs are in the Oval Office at the end of the day. You asked a question about Taiwan. If I say anything, I'm not going to say anything about our policy, because it would make news, and I don't want to do that. I do think it's fair to have a discussion now about cost. I think that's absolutely fair. Our budget, our expenditure on interest next year is going to exceed, we plan to exceed our defense budget. Think about that. Think about how much money we spend on defense. It's approaching $1 trillion. On an annualized basis, we're already there. I think if you take October and multiply it by 12, we're above $1 trillion. That's not how our interest payments flow. So it got blown out of proportion a little bit in the press. But we are very close to where our interest payments will exceed our defense budget. And you have to ask yourself, can you fight 3 wars at one time? Can you give Ukraine $60 billion? The request for Israel is $10 billion. That is the first of several. I mean, if we're going to give, I don't know what the total is, will be to Ukraine, but it would be approaching $100 billion. If we give $100 billion to Ukraine, how much are we going to give to Israel? Okay? And you have to ask yourself whether or not you can do that again without having economic impact. I'm not suggesting that we change our policy of defending Taiwan, and I think our policy is sound, but it doesn't take a genius to look over the numbers and say, sooner or later you have to start making priority changes. In fact, I think that probably has more impact on our commitment to Ukraine than it does on Taiwan. Because I think if you started to prioritize, if you really have to prioritize, which is something we do very poorly, one of the one of people's most favorite lines, if you're elected to Congress, in the House or the Senate or the White House even, every time somebody says, we can't afford this, the answer is always, we can't afford not to. We've been doing that for 30 years, okay? So can you continue to do that? Maybe. Can we afford not to have all these 3 wars at one time? Possibly. But if you did come down to starting to prioritize, I'm not sure Ukraine would be in the top 2.
I want to ask 2 question. The first thing, do you think that Trump will join the CPTPP? And secondly, what do you think the Trump administration will do with the illegal migration problem that you have on the southern border?
So we've got a question on the border and CTP-TP.
Yes. And CTP, is that the current incarnation of TPP?
Yes.
Or is it, okay, all right. The acronyms have changed since I was in office. No, on the Trans-Pacific thing. He really does not like multilateral deals. He feels like America gets taken advantage of. There are free riders. He would much rather negotiate one-off deals. It's one of the reasons I really don't think a chance of having a trade deal with Europe are probably very slight. Okay, chances of having a trade deal here are pretty good, and we can talk about that more if you want to. But no, he doesn't like multilateral deals because he thinks we get taken advantage of. And you could make the case at least. There's evidence that supports that. There's also evidence that supports the other side of that argument. On, what was your other one?
On the border.
The border, yeah. Oh, you're hearing all these things now that he's going to have these giant internment camps and gulag-style stuff. No, I don't see that. He will probably be more aggressive when he was in the first go-round on the border. By the way, the cages were put in by Obama, so I hate when people say, oh, Trump put people in cages. Kirsten Nielsen's a friend of mine, and she still can't go out in public because she's the person who put children in cages. Obama put the cages in. All we did was continue the policy. By the way, they're still there, if you're wondering about that, so in a lot of cases. But he will be more aggressive on the border simply because the country is getting to the point where they will want to be more aggressive. Even Democrats now are talking about border security. One of the parts of the negotiation right now on the Ukraine-Israel funding package is more money for border security because Democrats now even know it's starting to hurt them politically. When the mayor of New York, I mean, and you do not get more Democrat than the mayor of New York says he is not getting the support from Washington that he needs for this and that the border crisis is killing him, that means it's an issue now for Democrats as well as Republicans. So the attitude is changing about the border. Attitude isn't changing my country about immigration, legal immigration. There's still a split on that, but it's fairly stable, probably 80-20 in favor of more legal immigration. What's changing is the attitude on illegal immigration because people are starting to see the manifestations in their own cities, in their own towns regarding it. So that the willingness to accept harsher border policies will be there. I do not believe that translates into gulag-style internment camps for migrants. Nor do I believe it involves invading Mexico, which I've also heard.
Hi, more of a technical question. Regarding the Electoral College, you mentioned earlier about that and the disproportionate size it has with the states. Do you ever see a point at which the Electoral College will match the size of the state's population? I know that's a bit of a nerdy question.
No, it's not. But yeah,
The question on the Electoral College and how that works, Nick.
well, it's no. I guess your question is. They always rebalance, right? I mean, they change. But will California ever have? California will eventually start to lose seats. Florida is gaining seats. Texas is gaining seats, and that will change the outcomes. Let me answer it this way. If there are changes into the impact of the Electoral College, it will be organic and because of internal migration and population growth. We are never going to change the rules, okay? Because that requires an amendment to the Constitution, which requires, give or take, two-thirds of the population to sort of approve it. And we don't have anything in this country right now. I should take that back. I did write a piece for The Hill that I thought to myself, this is the one thing we might have two-thirds approval for, which is a mandatory retirement for federal service at 75. That may have a future, but changing the Electoral College would never change. Changing the Electoral College constitutionally is unlikely to happen ever. But your question is very interesting as to whether or not natural migration, internal migration patterns will rebalance. Possibly so, possibly so. New York is losing population, that hurts the Democrats. California is losing population, that hurts the Democrats. California and Texas are gaining population. That tends to help the Republicans unless until you start to realize people bring their politics with them, okay? I live in a state that has a great deal of migration from the Northeast. And people are leaving the Northeast because they don't like taxation, and they come down and they vote for politicians who want to raise their taxes. So you can't look at it just in terms of a snapshot. You have to look at it over time. So the answer is yes, sort of, but it will be organic and not constitutional.
I think we probably can do a couple more questions. So if people put their hands up, and we'll go to gentleman there in the middle of the glasses with his hand up, and then we'll come to the gentleman here.
And girls?
Hi, Mick, thanks for coming. You mentioned at the beginning that there aren't many people who are persona non grata or completely kind of persona non grata in the Trump administration. On the flip side of that spectrum, is there anyone who is 100% or incredibly likely never to get kicked out of that inner circle? I'm thinking in particular of members of Trump's family, Ivanka Trump in particular, the kind of wider. Do you think there's anyone who Trump would absolutely never get rid of?
Nope. Do you want to re-ask the question, or?
Yeah, so the question is around, is there anybody in Trump's inner circle that would ever completely say, no, you're out, never come out?
I mean, his family is his family, and you never change. I mean, I've worked for a family business, and I remember when I've worked for a family business, and then I've been the family in a family business. So I've been on both sides of this. And when I went to go work in the White House, people were like, oh, what are you going to do about Jared? I'm like, look, we're not doing anything about Jared, okay? We're going to figure out a way to work with Jared because he owns the grandchildren. And that's the end of the story, okay? You're never getting the son-in-law fired, and I had no interest in doing it. You just figure out a way to make the team work, right? So family's always going to be family, but that doesn't mean they're in the White House working for you. In fact, there's no way Jared and Ivanka are coming back. I shouldn't say that. Right now, Jared and Ivanka would not come back and work for them, but that could change. And if Don Jr. says something that the president doesn't like, he's still going to be Don Jr., but he's not going to be speaking at rallies. The Trump brand that's what it is, okay? And if you're good for the brand, you're in. If you're bad for the brand, you're out. Doesn't mean you're out of the family. I mean, he's a wonderful video, by the way, if you go see it, of him going to school with his granddaughter today. It's fabulous. I mean, he is a human being. I know people don't think that about him sometimes. But family's always going to be family, but it doesn't mean you're in the hallway down the office from the president. So no, no one is there for good.
Cool. Good, quick questions. If this question is a good, quick one, then we could probably squeeze one more in as well. So I'll tell you, we'll take, while you're there, we'll take that question and then... No, you're fine.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I was just wondering, how did Trump's relationship with Boris Johnson compare to that of Theresa May's? And I suppose other world leaders?
Thank you. You have to repeat the question.
Yes, of course. And the question is, how did Donald Trump's relationship with Boris compare to that with other world leaders, and indeed the one he had with Theresa May in her time?
He took a great deal of criticism for having a better relationship with Boris than he did with Theresa. And I've never understood it. I remember talking to the press like, why is it because she's a woman? I'm like, no, it's human nature. Sometimes you get along better with people than with other people. You just do. And he just didn't get along with Theresa very well. And he loved Boris. He got along really well with, one of his best friends was Shinzo Abe. There's just something about, and by the way, why did he like Shinzo Abe? Okay, golf. That's it. I mean, I'm really good friends with Trey Gowdy, a member of Congress, because we have something in common. We could do something together. And you can use that to build other parts of your relationship. So he just never mixed with Theresa May. And I don't know Theresa well enough. You certainly know her better than I did. And maybe there's something, maybe she's never going to be friends with. There's a lot of folks I can't be friends with. Doesn't mean I'm enemies with them. It just means I'm not hanging out with them. He didn't like to hang out with Theresa May, and he'd hang out he loved Scott Cameron. Scott Morrison from Australia. They got along really, really well. He really enjoyed Imran Khan, a very charismatic sort of leader. Really liked Narendra Modi personally, except for the fact that he was a toucher. Okay, Narendra loved to. If you want to see a really uncomfortable picture of Donald Trump, there's a picture of them walking around in Houston, Texas, like this, in front of 70,000 screaming Indian Americans. The president, by the way, he jokes about it himself. He's a germaphobe. He does not like to shake hands with people. So that was the only thing that sort of stuck out. But it's human nature that you don't get along with everybody, and he didn't get along with some and got along with others.
And it's interesting you make that point. I went to Pakistan and met Imran Khan when he was leader there, and you're right, he's one of those people who's got a presence.
Walks in a room,
yeah, phenomenal. But, yes.
Thank you very much. You mentioned about the interest payments and military spend. Just to put that in context for the UK, our yearly interest payments 2.3 times our military spend.
Wow.
But just a question on the military side. Trump said he would stop the Ukraine war immediately.
Yeah.
How?
No one believes that.
So the question is that how Trump's saying he would stop the Ukraine war. How does he do that?
He doesn't. That's a throwaway line. That's bluster. That's the same thing about making Mexico pay for a wall. He will pay a small political price for that because it's just wrong. But face it, either you like Donald Trump and you've learned to live with that kind of stuff, or you don't like Donald Trump and that's not going to make you dislike him any more than you already do. So I don't think anybody thinks that Donald Trump has some special secret plan that he's cooked up in Mar-a-Lago on, genius way to end the war in 24 hours. That is simply not going to happen. Might he cut off funding? Yeah, that's a possibility. In fact, Congress may do that before he gets to office if he wins. There's a real debate right now but one of the reasons I'm absolutely convinced that the Biden administration has asked for $60 billion, which is an obscenely large amount of money, is that they might think this is the last bite they have at the apple. And the only reason they're tying it to Israel is because they don't think they can get it across the finish line by itself right now. They have to marry it to something that they think has to pass. So they're sort of looking down the road and saying, we need to get as much as we can now because we can't go back to the well after this. So if Trump takes office and said, we're cutting off funding, he doesn't have the full ability to do that, but because the Congress passes the laws and he has to enforce them, et cetera. But he can make things really, really difficult really, really quickly. And I think that's probably closer to reality. But there's no secret plan, cutting a deal with Putin to divide Ukraine in half that I read about in the press. No, it's just him as a throwaway line on a topic he doesn't want to talk about.
Thank you, Mick. And I'm going to ask you the final
Yes.
sort of the controversial question of the evening. You touched
We
on
haven't done that yet.
a topic. Well, you touched on something earlier on, and Trump's bonding with people, particularly over things like golf and things like that.
Yeah.
And I know, and from conversation you and I have had, and attempts to get out of Royal Portrush, your love of golf as
Yes.
well. Who's the better golfer, you or Donald Trump?
Oh, he beat me. He never beat me. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I misspoke. I never beat him. I'm a 7-8 handicap. He's a 5. People ask me if he cheats, right? He doesn't cheat. He changes the rules. Bill Clinton cheated. Okay, there's two. Bill Clinton would shoot 92 walk-offs. Say, hey, I shot 78. Donald Trump will play, and I've seen him shoot his age. And if you play golf, you know what that means. Okay, that's an accomplishment. I aspire to in my old age to be able to shoot 75 when I'm 75. That is a major accomplishment as a golfer. I have seen him do it. Does he give himself 4-footers? Yes, he does. He's the President of the United States. He's not the only person to do that. But I've seen him shoot 75 and then walk in the pro shop afterwards and say, hey, Mickey, who was out there today playing in my age group? Well, so-and-so and so-and-so and so. Any of them beat 75? No, sir, Mr. President. Today was the senior club championship. So, and then his name goes up on the wall as a senior club champion. So does he do stuff like that? Yeah, but he doesn't cheat in the way that other people cheat at golf. I remember playing with him one time. And I had him even after 15 holes at Bedminster, and I was ribbing him pretty good. I said, I got you, old man. Today's the day. I'm feeling it. I was playing pretty good. He was a little off his game. I said, today you're going down, because I've never beaten him, and he always let me know. But I never let Donald Trump beat me, and Donald Trump doesn't hire people that let them beat him at golf. He's very serious about golf. And he looks at me and goes, you don't have a chance. And he finished birdie, par, birdie. And beat me by 3 shots. So it's hard to cheat when you hit it 250 down the middle, you hit it up to 17 feet and make the putt. And he did that twice out of the last 3 holes come back. He's a good golfer. He has to play every single day in order to do it. But he is probably the best golfer that we've had in the White House. Kennedy was supposedly very good. Clinton was not. Obama was not. Ford was, when I was a little kid, I saw Gerald Ford hit a golf ball into a swimming pool at a golf course, which is really hard to do. But he does enjoy golf, and he enjoyed doing business. He didn't do business on the golf course. He built relationships on the golf course, and he's really good at that.
Brilliant. Mick, thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining us. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
You going?